Joining me now is the Republican senator from Missouri, Roy Blunt. Senator, great to see you. Thank you very much. So, Roy Moore is accusing Mitch McConnell and the rest of the Senate establishment Republicans of trying to drive him out of office. Is he correct?
Well, I don't know if he's correct or not, but we're at a point now where really Alabama voters are going to make that decision. And in the Senate, no matter who gets elected from Alabama or what happens with anybody else, we need to be sure that we've got an environment where people want to come and be part of that, where women are comfortable being part of that. My chief of staff's a woman, my legislative director's a woman, my press person is a woman. We wouldn't want to have an environment where you couldn't have the best people come, and so we put together a working group. Senator Klobuchar and Senator Cortez Masto and Senator Capito and I, Senator Shelby joined us. We've proposed changing our rules so there's mandatory orientation toward these things that shouldn't happen, so people know what is perceived to be inappropriate, and also to change the law going back to the 1980s, where it may have seemed reasonable at the time. But in the current law, if you report harassment, you're the one that has to go into 20 hours of counseling before you can decide whether you were really harassed or not. That's just totally inappropriate.
Now, politically, are Republicans better off if Roy Moore wins or if he loses? If he loses the seat, or whether he wins and Democrats think they have an issue going forward?
Well, you know, I said that I thought the women's story was more credible than his response, that Alabama voters deserved a better choice. But they're going to have to make that decision. They know Roy Moore a whole lot better than I do. I've met him once. They've watched him in a pretty controversial career for 20 years, and we'll just have to see what they do.
You say that the women's stories were credible. What about the women, more than a dozen, who came out during the 2016 campaign against President Trump? Were they credible?
Well, whatever they had to say, people heard that, and they elected President Trump, the President of the United States. So at some point, I think you have to let the voters have a say here.
Now, with Al Franken, Republicans are seizing on that. The president has been silent on Roy Moore since he came back from his trip in Asia, yet he seized on Al Franken's misconduct, acknowledged misconduct. Franken immediately apologized and welcomes an ethics investigation, not to excuse what he did. But the fact that the president is so quick to jump on Al Franken, but is still silent on Roy Moore of his own party.
Well, you know, I think Congresswoman Dingell just said, you're innocent until proven guilty unless you say you did it. And Al Franken, of course, has said, I did this. He said, I'm sorry for it, but he's also said he did it. And I think the president understands you can be accused of lots of things in politics, and we'll see what voters decide.
I wanted to briefly ask you about your own colleague in Missouri, Claire McCaskill, has talked about the fact that she was a victim of sexual harassment when she was an intern. Your own women colleagues have experienced this as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely, it's totally unacceptable. And, you know, back to what I said to start with, in the Congress of the United States, you want to have an environment where people are comfortable wanting to work there, saying they work there, putting on their resume in future years they worked there, without feeling like there was an environment that wasn't open and appropriate in both seeking opinions and seeking the kind of advice that the country and the Congress needs.
Now, after an event on tax reform, which is the big issue facing the Senate now, your colleague in Arizona, Jeff Flake, was caught on an open mic saying this.
Become the party of Roy Moore and Donald Trump. We are toast.
What about the political fallout from all of this, and from the impression that this tax bill is opposed by 59% of Americans right now, according to the latest Quinnipiac poll?
Well, you know, I think your comment there after a event on tax reform. So all these things do is they take attention if we don't handle the environment correctly, if we don't have the rules correctly, because tax reform clearly is going to affect the country. It's going to affect our economic future. Looking at the way that the tax bill has been reported, I could understand people's concern about it. But when you look at the real tax bill, both House and Senate, I think it's designed to do two things. One is to create immediately more take-home pay for hardworking families, And the second thing is to, at the other end of the scale, do whatever we can to be sure that there are better jobs in the future for those very same families. We've had 8 years of economic stagnation for hardworking families, and this tax bill, I think, creates the opportunity to move dramatically beyond that.
There's plenty of evidence from Republicans as well as Democrats that, first of all, the corporate taxes are permanent. The individual taxes expire in about a decade. And it blows a hole in the deficit of at least $1.5 trillion, but by many nonpartisan estimates, as much as $2.2 trillion if you take away the gimmicks to just get it under that budget ceiling for now.
Well, it doesn't take much in economic growth to offset both of those numbers. If we get back to the 70-year average of 3.2% growth instead of the Obama year average of less than 2, we're up to 3 already. We're anticipating in this bill 2.6, and every 0.1% of growth there makes a huge difference in federal revenue. If you believe tax policy has economic consequences, you don't statically score that. You score that based on what those consequences will be. And I've talked to lots of economists about this who are usually pretty gloomy, who have been very optimistic that this bill does what we hope it would do in terms of making us more competitive all over the world.
At a recent Wall Street Journal interview with Gary Cohn, of course, the top economic advisor in the White House, they polled the audience, the CEOs in that group, who among you would actually reinvest this tax cut into your company and raise wages, and only 5 people in this large group raised their hands. That has not been the history. Corporations don't reinvest this kind of money. And when have any of these projections actually proved true?
Oh, well, I think they do reinvest, and I think one of the things you do in this tax bill is you create an opportunity to bring maybe as much as $2 trillion back into our economy that's currently overseas because of our tax policy. You want to talk about a stimulus. We've never actually even imagined a stimulus that would be $2 trillion of other money coming back to the country. I've asked CEOs who have that money over there how much of it they'd bring back. Generally, the answer is all of it that we haven't invested there, and that's most of it.
Is it going to pass the Senate?
I think we'll pass the Senate.
Thank you so much.